During the 1990s, bodybuilding went through a transformation no one was really ready for. That's when the so-called mass monster era was born, a phase where the limits of the human body were pushed further than ever before. What once looked like exaggeration or pure fantasy suddenly became reality on the biggest stages in the world. The aesthetic standard changed overnight. Athletes started showing up weighing 265 pounds, 285 pounds, or even more, around 120 kilograms to 130 plus kg, while still maintaining a level of conditioning that made no sense for that time. It wasn't just about size. It was density. It was visual shock. That instant moment where the crowd would hold its breath the second a competitor stepped on stage. This new generation didn't just get bigger, it rewrote the rules. Judging criteria had to adapt, and the idea of the ideal physique was completely redefined. From that point on, being symmetrical or well-conditioned wasn't enough. You had to be big, thick, and intimidating. After this shift, bodybuilding was never the same again. And that's exactly the insane period we're diving into here. In this video, you'll see the 10 most intimidating physiques of the 1990s and 2000s, bodies that defined an era, split opinions, and helped shape modern bodybuilding as we know it today. These are physiques that are still remembered as symbols of an extreme time in the sport. Now, before we jump into this legendary list, make sure to subscribe to the channel and drop a like. It helps the channel way more than you might think. And let me ask you this. Do you think today's bodybuilding has ever come close to this level of visual impact? Or was this an era that will never be repeated? Let's find out together. Let's kick off this list with one of the most massive human beings this planet has ever seen. When it comes to ridiculous size, very few names hit as hard as Paul Dillet. To this day, he's remembered as one of the most terrifying physiques ever to step on a bodybuilding stage. The moment he appeared, the entire atmosphere changed. The crowd knew they were about to witness something completely outside the norm. Dillet joined the IFBB in 1992 and, in an incredibly short amount of time, was already among the elite. By 1993, he placed in the top 6 at the Mr. Olympia, something extremely rare for someone so new to the pro scene. That made it clear he wasn't just a prospect, but a physical phenomenon that couldn't be ignored. What really set his physique apart was the combination of insane mass and extreme vascularity. Veins exploded across his entire body, giving the impression that his physique was constantly on the edge. In the off-season, reports suggest Paul pushed past 320 pounds, around 145 kilograms, a number that was absolutely unreal for that era and helped build his almost mythical reputation. But it wasn't all perfect. Despite his unbelievable size, Dillet struggled with posing and overall body control on stage. Many believe this limitation was the main reason he never reached the absolute top of the sport, even though he possessed one of the largest physiques of his generation. Still, his career included major accomplishments. He won the Night of Champions in 1999 and secured an impressive 4th place at the 1994 Mr. Olympia, proving that he wasn't just about size. He was competitive at the highest level. His final professional appearance came in 2006, closing the chapter on an athlete who pushed the concept of extreme mass further than most ever dared to go. Dennis James was one of the most talked about and respected physiques of the late 1990s. The moment he appeared on the professional scene, it was obvious that something different was happening. His physique didn't stand out just because of size, but because of the immediate visual impact it had on anyone watching. When Dennis turned pro in 1998, he was already being labeled as one of the best physiques in the world. The combination of insane density, extreme dryness, and serious mass made his body look like it was carved out of stone. It was the kind of physique that looked incredible both on stage and off stage. No special angles or lighting required. And outside of competitions, he might have been even more intimidating. Training photos of Dennis James spread through bodybuilding magazines at the time and quickly became iconic. Every image reinforced the idea that he was a true monster, someone who looked stage-ready year-round, even far away from contest season. Despite all the hype and massive expectations surrounding him, Dennis never directly battled for the Mr. Olympia title. Still, he was a consistent presence at the event for many years, standing next to some of the greatest names in bodybuilding history. On stage, he usually competed at around 255 to 265 pounds, about 115 to 120 kilograms, always bringing a thick, rock-solid physique. His final Mr. Olympia appearance came in 2011, where he finished in 10th place. The following year, he surprised many people by coming out of retirement to compete in the Masters Olympia, closing out his career with a respectable performance. Dennis James may not have won the sport's biggest title, but he left his mark as one of the driest and most intimidating physiques of that era. When Jean-Pierre Fux started turning heads in bodybuilding, many believed a future absolute champion was emerging. Jean-Pierre was seen as a true genetic freak, one of those athletes who seemed born to dominate the sport. His physique impressed people even before he fully established himself on the professional stage. Fux turned pro in 1994 and quickly became a hot topic behind the scenes at major competitions. It wasn't just his size, but the way he combined mass and definition that left coaches, athletes, and fans intrigued. Every time he showed up, the same phrase started circulating: "This guy is going places." During the off-season, reports suggested Jean-Pierre weighed around 300 pounds, roughly 135 kilograms, which was extremely rare for someone who could still maintain such a high level of muscular definition. His physique looked far too complete for someone still on the rise, reinforcing the belief that reaching the top was only a matter of time. That expectation grew even stronger in 1997, when he placed 7th at the Mr. Olympia. For many, that result wasn't a ceiling, it was just the beginning. Fux was soon being labeled as one of the next big names in bodybuilding, someone who could eventually stand toe-to-toe with the established mass monsters. But fate had other plans. In 2002, during a photo shoot for Flex magazine, Jean-Pierre suffered a devastating injury, tearing his quadriceps while squatting over 660 pounds, more than 300 kilograms. The severity of the injury brought his competitive career to an early end, turning his story into one of the greatest what-ifs of the mass monster era. In the middle of the mass monster era, very few names caused as much shock as Greg Kovacs. He didn't look like a typical bodybuilder. He looked like something beyond the norm, almost like a genetic experiment taken to the extreme. His sheer size stood out even among giants, creating an aura of disbelief everywhere he went. Standing an impressive 6 feet 4 inches, 1.93 meters tall, Greg claimed to compete at around 330 pounds, about 150 kilograms, a number that still sounds insane even by today's standards. In the off-season, the stories became even crazier, with reports saying he easily pushed past 400 pounds, over 180 kilograms. It was a level of mass so far outside the curve that it seemed to defy the logic of competitive bodybuilding. The impact of his physique went far beyond the stage. People who were around Greg often say that the moment he walked into a room, the entire vibe changed. His size was so extreme that it caused instant shock, something that's hard to fully understand unless you've seen an athlete of that scale in person. Wild and sometimes extreme stories about his daily life helped build the legend around Kovacs. Personal anecdotes, awkward situations, and everyday challenges reinforced the idea that carrying a body that massive came with struggles far beyond training and dieting, humanizing, in a way, that monster physique. Despite all that size and visual impact, Greg Kovacs never achieved major results in professional competitions, never cracking the top 10 at the biggest events. In 2013, he passed away just weeks before turning 45, leaving behind an unforgettable image. One of the largest and most impressive bodies bodybuilding has ever produced, even without the competitive recognition many expected. Not every mass monster is remembered for titles alone, and Gunter Schlierkamp is the perfect example of that. He may not have been the most decorated athlete of his generation, but he earned something far rarer in professional bodybuilding: genuine love from the fans and respect from nearly the entire community. His physique was colossal. In the off-season, Gunter reportedly pushed past 300 pounds, around 136 kilograms, carrying a level of mass that impressed even the biggest names of his era. That size, combined with his wide structure, made him impossible to ignore whenever he stepped on stage or appeared at an event. That extreme look turned him into a regular face on the covers of the biggest bodybuilding magazines. Schlierkamp embodied the spirit of the mass monster era like few others. Huge, impactful, and visually intimidating, yet approachable and charismatic once he stepped away from the spotlight. The moment that truly cemented Gunter's place in bodybuilding history came in 2002. At the Show of Strength, he pulled off one of the biggest upsets the sport had ever seen by defeating none other than Ronnie Coleman. For many fans, it felt almost impossible to believe. The shock was even greater because that win came just weeks after Ronnie had claimed yet another Mr. Olympia title. The result shook the bodybuilding world and forever etched Schlierkamp's name as the man who managed to take down the king, even if it was just for one night. To this day, that moment is remembered as one of the most surprising episodes of the mass monster era. Long before the so-called mass monster era officially began, Lou Ferrigno was already a living legend in bodybuilding. While many athletes of the 1990s were just getting started, Ferrigno carried an almost mythical status, one that had been built decades earlier, back when extreme size was still something rare to witness. A two-time Mr. Universe champion in the 1970s, Lou gained worldwide recognition after appearing in the documentary Pumping Iron, where he shared the spotlight with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Not long after that, his career exploded beyond bodybuilding when he took on the role of the Hulk, turning his physique into a pop culture icon and introducing bodybuilding to audiences who had never followed the sport before. Even back then, his body was far ahead of the standard. In the 70s, Ferrigno easily pushed past 265 pounds, 120 plus kg, which seemed almost unbelievable for that era. His massive size, combined with a wide, imposing frame, made him look like a true giant compared to other competitors of his generation. By the 1990s, as the mass monster era began to take shape, Lou proved he still belonged among the new giants. At the 1992 Mr. Olympia, he showed up weighing an incredible 291 pounds, 132 kilograms, shocking many fans. In 1993, he returned even bigger at around 300 pounds, 136 kilograms, showing that his physical evolution kept pace with the increasingly extreme direction of the sport. His final competitive appearance came at the 1994 Masters Olympia, marking the end of a historic career. Lou Ferrigno wasn't just a stage bodybuilder. He crossed generations, helped popularize the sport worldwide, and proved that the idea of a monster physique existed long before the 1990s. When the conversation turns to extreme bodybuilding, there's one name that inevitably towers over the rest: Ronnie Coleman. For many fans, athletes, and experts, he is simply the greatest bodybuilder of all time. Not just because of his titles, but because of the physical level he reached and the lasting impact he left on the sport. Ronnie began his journey in the 1990s as just another talented competitor among many. But between 1997 and 1998, something changed dramatically. His body underwent a transformation so extreme it seemed impossible to happen in such a short time. It was as if he had unlocked an entirely new level within bodybuilding. That shift became obvious on stage. In 1997, Ronnie finished the Mr. Olympia in 9th place. Just 1 year later, in 1998, he shocked the world by winning his first title, kicking off one of the most dominant reigns in bodybuilding history. From that moment on, the sport officially entered a new era of size, density, and sheer physical brutality. The absolute peak came in 2004. That year, Ronnie stepped onto the Olympia stage weighing around 295 pounds, 134 kilograms, a completely unreal number for a physique that still displayed extreme conditioning and razor-sharp muscle separation. He wasn't just big, he was thick, dense, and visually overwhelming from every angle. That out-of-this-world size, combined with a level of raw strength that became legendary, turned Ronnie Coleman into a true myth. Even today, decades after his prime, his name remains the ultimate reference when people talk about the mass monster era. And the question still hangs in the air: will anyone ever reach that level again? Among all the monsters of the mass era, this is one of my personal favorites. To many fans, Nasser El Sonbaty is the most unfairly overlooked bodybuilder of them all. His physique combined an extremely rare mix of massive size, balanced proportions, and aggressive conditioning, something very few athletes of that generation were able to bring together at the same time. Nasser turned pro in 1990, But it was really from 1993 on that the world started paying close attention. His impact was immediate on the European stages, where he earned bronze medals at major Grand Prix events, proving that he wasn't just huge, but also highly competitive against the best in the world. In 1994, his Mr. Olympia debut ended with a solid 7th-place finish, a result that made it clear he wasn't there just to fill the lineup. Year after year, his physique kept evolving in size, density, and stage presence, leading many to see him as a real threat to the established order. That expectation reached its peak in 1997, when Nasser became the main name people pointed to as a true challenger to Dorian Yates. Even though Dorian walked away with another title, a large portion of fans left that Olympia with the same opinion. The physique that truly deserved the win was Nasser's. On that stage, he showed up at around 300 pounds, 136 kilograms, displaying one of the most visually shocking physiques ever seen in the competition. Despite never winning the Mr. Olympia, Nasser competed until 2005 and left behind an eternal legacy. He passed away in 2013 at the age of 48, but to this day, he's remembered as the challenger many believe was robbed of a rightful place at the very top of the mass monster era. Looking at Marcus Ruhl was like staring straight at a wall of muscle. Without exaggeration, he was the pure embodiment of raw size in bodybuilding. Even in an era already dominated by monsters, Ruhl managed to stand out purely because of the insane visual impact he created the moment he stepped on stage. In the off-season, Marcus easily pushed past 300 pounds, 136 plus kg, numbers that are intimidating on their own. Even in competition shape, he stepped on stage at around 270 pounds, 122 kilograms, carrying a level of mass so extreme it seemed to challenge any normal idea of human proportions. His physique never went unnoticed in any comparison. His massive muscles, especially through the upper body and arms, made it impossible to ignore his presence. Every pose looked exaggerated. Every movement reinforced the feeling that his physique was beyond what the sport was used to seeing. Ruhl didn't need titles to command attention. His size did all the talking. Still, his career had some standout moments. In 2000, he won the Toronto Pro, and in 2002, he delivered a legendary performance at the Night of Champions, showing up with a dry, dense, and brutally impressive physique. That night cemented his status as a fan favorite. At the Mr. Olympia, his best result came in 2004, when he finished in 5th place. Marcus Ruhl retired in 2010, but to this day he's remembered as one of the greatest symbols of extreme bodybuilding, a true icon of pure mass. When Dorian Yates arrived on the professional bodybuilding scene, he didn't come in making noise. Quite the opposite, he showed up quietly, almost under the radar. But it didn't take long for people to realize that something completely new was happening. The sport was about to change forever, even if almost no one noticed it at first. In 1991, Dorian shared the Mr. Olympia stage with Lee Haney, who that year won his 8th and final title before retiring. That Olympia symbolically marked the end of a more classic era and opened the door for something darker, denser, and far more intimidating that was about to take over. The very next year, in 1992, Dorian returned to the Olympia and shocked the world by winning his first title. This wasn't just a victory, it was a breaking point. From that moment on, the so-called mass monster era was officially born. The aesthetic standard had changed, and bodybuilding would never be the same again. Competing at around 260 pounds, 118 kilograms, Dorian brought a physique unlike anything seen before. He wasn't just big, he was incredibly dense, brutally conditioned, and visually threatening. His muscles looked packed, heavy, and overwhelming, intimidating his competitors before the comparisons even began. Known as the Shadow, Dorian Yates dominated the sport for 6 straight years, creating one of the most iconic reigns in bodybuilding history. In 1998, serious injuries forced him into retirement, but by then his legacy was already locked in. More than a champion, Dorian was the man who paved the way for every mass monster that came after him. Without him, this era simply wouldn't exist. After revisiting this insane era of bodybuilding, one thing becomes crystal clear. The mass monster era was about much more than size. It was about impact, presence, and moments that are permanently burned into the memory of anyone who truly loves this sport. These physiques didn't just dominate stages. They changed how the world understood the limits of the human body. Every athlete on this list represented a unique chapter in that story. Some won titles, some won over the fans, and some left us wondering how much further they could have gone. But every single one of them helped build an era that is still compared, debated, and celebrated to this day. Now I want to hear from you. Who's your favorite mass monster? Is there someone you think was left off this list and deserved to be here? Drop a comment. I read them all and love talking with people who truly live and breathe bodybuilding. If this video brought you value, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and consider becoming a channel member to support this project and help keep content like this coming. Your support makes all the difference in keeping these stories alive. And don't go anywhere. On the end screen, there's another video waiting for you that connects directly with this topic and might surprise you. Just click and keep this journey through the most brutal and fascinating era in bodybuilding history going. Big thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.